When I think about the blessings of community, there's a story I remember. An old story. It's old, but it means a lot to me, and maybe it will mean something to you. It's a story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, a short form of his name, means comforter. Nehemiah was descended from Jews who were captured and enslaved about 2,600 years ago when the Babylonians conquered Judah and destroyed Jerusalem and the first temple. 75 years later, the Persians took over. Now we fast forward 100 years. And Nehemiah, a Jew, is a servant of high rank. He's cupbearer to the Persian king. Now, this was a position of trust. And of course, sometimes he might have to taste the wine before the king drank, so that it was also a position of some risk if the wine happened to be poisoned. But throughout history, cupbearers have developed a close relationship to the king they served. And this was true with Nehemiah. His people's history resonating within him, Nehemiah longed to see Jerusalem. He wondered if it might be possible to rebuild the famous wall of Jerusalem, a wall that had long been in ruins. It had been a massive wall, 100 feet high, 380 feet thick. No bulldozers then, no cranes. 100 feet high and 380 feet thick. To Nehemiah, who was steeped in the stories of his ancestors, the Jerusalem wall was symbolic of his people's well-being, of their presence and vitality in the world. Nehemiah, who was the descendant of slaves, serving the new conquerors with the trust of the Persian king, in a conversation that we can only imagine, Nehemiah spoke to the king of his longing, the longing in his heart to see Jerusalem. And the king gave Nehemiah permission to travel to Jerusalem and to discover whether it might be possible to rebuild the Jerusalem wall. He appointed Nehemiah to the purely nominal position of governor of Judah. Most likely, the king acted in part out of self-interest. Jerusalem was in the Persian Empire, but not entirely under control. Nehemiah traveled to the home of his ancestors with a title and no resources whatsoever. What would happen? We can imagine the king wondering. When he got to Jerusalem, Nehemiah found the people utterly demoralized. Although the temple had been rebuilt some years before, the local authorities were Syrian and Samaritan and hostile to the Jews. Nehemiah had no power to command. He had no troops to compel. He had no money to bribe. All he could do was to begin talking with the ordinary citizens of Jerusalem. They met in small groups, and Nehemiah asked people about the wall. What did they think about the wall? What did they long for? The Syrian and Samaritan authorities found Nehemiah and these conversations annoying. They were well served by the broken wall. Jewish nobles, the only Jews with resources, were uninterested and uncooperative because the work was too hard and would be too costly. Rebuild a wall 100 feet high and 380 feet thick, the task was obviously impossible for citizens of a conquered city. The impossibility of the task was so obvious that none of the powers that be worried too much about Nehemiah and those annoying conversations. Nehemiah had no power. He had no money. He could do nothing more than keep the conversation going, listening to people and allowing them to listen to one another. In this conversational turning around of ideas about the wall, the people of Jerusalem reconnected with one another and with their shared longing for restoration of their wall, their longing for restoration of community. A small idea, a modest idea emerged. What if each family, parents and children, would work just a little bit on the wall nearest to where they lived, just a little bit? There was no official help. Only members of the community looking into one another's eyes, hearing one another's voices, recognizing a shared longing. They wanted the wall rebuilt. It was a symbol of their community. They wanted Jerusalem, their city, once again to be a safe and comforting place for home and hearth, for faith and community, for young and old. It didn't begin with a king's command or soldiers barking orders or wealthy leaders buying influence. It began with families, with neighbors, with the idea of community. In bits and pieces, in stops and starts, with the little ones picking up the smallest stones, the people of Jerusalem rebuilt their wall. Human history is loud with stories of conquerors and powerful kings. It's littered with tales of power brokers who divide the world up amongst themselves. In the 21st century, humanity is accustomed to the idea that power and the manipulation of power is what gets things done. The quieter counterpoint to humanity's loud story of concentrated individual power is in stories like the one about Nehemiah and Jerusalem's wall. It's a quiet story of community. It's a quiet story about people who discover through face-to-face, open-ended conversation that they share the same vision, a vision each had set aside as impossible. Yet when they began to listen to one another, to hear every voice, they discovered together who they were. They found themselves a community of people with a shared purpose and shared identity. This story is very different from the usual conception of great architectural projects. There isn't a royal command to build a fortress or construct a cathedral or thousands of workers officially assigned to the task. It begins with Nehemiah's single soft voice inviting people to answer the question, what do you long for? It continues with multiple voices that ask, what might I do? Might I help? It gathers momentum with, and you? What will you do? When will you start? Will you bring your children? It ends with the massive wall rising once again. They did it. They rebuilt the wall, and along with it, their sense of community. The conventional paradigm of leadership as top-down is mostly what we know. But top-down leadership, the I command you kind of leadership, misses the soft voice. It misses the longings of the heart. It's out of touch with community. Nehemiah's style of leadership is adaptive. It's guided by intuition. It seeks out the perceptions of each person in the community. It gathers people together to listen to one another. It allows solutions to emerge from the experience of everyone in the community. It allows a vision to develop from the ground up, the same way a wall begins at the ground and rises. Nehemiah's story is about the abundance and accomplishment that is possible through collaboration. It's a story of ordinary people who step by step work together to bring about great change. It's a story of community. It's a paradigm of leadership that engages each person in vision and decision. Most people don't think about choosing how they'll be in community together. They join a club or a service organization or a church, and they assume it's a hierarchy with rules. They don't often consider that it matters what the rules are, or even whether the rules are followed. Unitarian Universalist congregations in the 21st century are intended to be communities where rules are carefully thought out and followed, where vision and decision are informed and refreshed periodically by gentle, exploratory, small group conversation. Stakeholder meetings where every voice is heard. Visioning circles where people share what they long for. Too often, congregational decision-making is stuck in the past. It's rooted in 20th century, even 19th century paradigms of a senior minister who is divinely anointed and usually surrounded by a close network of power brokers. Sometimes those power brokers are formal authorities called elders or trustees or deacons. Sometimes they're a group of influential insiders without formal authority, but who have special access to the senior minister, and those voices are heard above all others. And sometimes people conclude that their only choice is between an authoritarian minister with an inner circle or a small group of powerful members who resist the minister's authority. Won't that work out well? None of these models is good, none. Never have been, never will be. I've often thought, what kind of leader do I want to be? And I think I've known the answer for a while. I don't want to be somebody who's out of touch with the community, someone who feels anointed, someone who hears only the loud voices, the voices of the most influential. And I don't want to be someone who's locked in a struggle for power. I want to be a leader who's able to hear even the softest voice. In Nehemiah's story, the authorities had no interest in rebuilding, but the people longed to restore not just their wall, but their sense of community. They felt a deep-seated need to be secure in, to be comforted by, to thrive within their community, to have their vision of community become real. Nehemiah, comforter, a leader who listens to even the softest voice. That's the kind of leader I long to be. In a large UU congregation, how do members exercise a collaborative power that's fundamentally theirs? Some say by logical persuasion, which often turns into argumentative dispute and a struggle among loud-voiced leaders, each with an idea of their own preferred outcome. This is often what happens. What does it do to community? Is a polarizing dispute helpful? Doesn't the winning side merely replace one influential leader or leaders with another, one top-down authority structure, formal or informal, with another? And in a Unitarian Universalist congregation founded on the idea of respect for one another, why would we consent to a system that privileges the loudest voice or the most effective power broker? Consider Jerusalem's wall. The Jewish religious leaders and the conquerors each claimed the authority to decide whether to rebuild the wall. But the real authority was in the hands of the people and in their children's hands, each bearing a stone, no matter how small, to shore up the wall where they lived and worked. This is how people in a faith community assert the power that is fundamentally theirs, not by contest or struggle, but by learning what is in each other's hearts, by learning from each other what is most important, by sharing their deepest longings. In 21st century Unitarian Universalist congregations, we create opportunities for this kind of sharing, visioning circles and stakeholder meetings. We see each other's faces. We hear each other's voices. We listen to what's in each other's hearts. Do we choose how we'll be in community together? I think we do. I think that every day we make a choice. No matter what choices we made in the past, each day is a new day and an opportunity for a new choice. People who gather in community can choose to listen to each other with respect, to honor what's in each other's hearts, to make compassion and caring the foundation of our relationships. We can choose to hear not only the words, but the feeling beneath the words, to hear the longings of the heart, to be comforters to one another. When people choose to be together in this loving way, they create conditions that allow the softest voice to be heard. And then there arises the voice of hope and possibility. This is a kind of loving persistence that emerges from this choice about community. Persistence is important because disagreement is inevitable, but disagreement need not mean disrespect. The existence of different perspectives. Each person in this room has a different perspective, however slightly it may differ from someone else's, but a different perspective. And the existence of different perspective means an opportunity to see what lies within the hearts and minds of our companions on the journey. When we interpret disagreement as different perspectives, then it's easier to listen, not merely to the loudest voice or the voice of someone wearing a badge of authority, but to the softest voice and to every voice. And if we wish to gather in true community, only one kind of authority matters. It's the authority of respectful listening and collaborative action, the authority of compassion and love that honors the heart's deepest yearning. True community is Jerusalem restored. Like the walls of a great city, true community rises from the ground up. It begins in the understood heart. It grows in harmony with the softest voice. It comes into being when people are willing to carry their own small stones in common purpose. This place, this hallowed community, this is Jerusalem. Let's build together.